Whether this ends up being a good pope or a bad pope, whatever ends up being the case, the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. Okay, let's talk about the major historic news yesterday, which is that, of course, a new pope was elected. Robert Francis Prevost, who will now be Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope. As you've heard, he's from Chicago. What do I think of this pope? What is my analysis? That's the question. And I've, of course, been asked this quite a bit over the last 24 hours or so. Well, he's been pope for precisely one day, so it's a little hard to assess his papacy at this juncture. And I will say that it's been very strange to be on social media, especially on X, over the past 24 hours as a Catholic, because this is the first time that a pope has been chosen, and then immediately people start combing through the pope's old tweets. It's weird. It's a strange thing, and I get that if you're not a Catholic, doesn't seem strange to you because you see the pope as essentially a political figure because you're viewing it from the outside. But as a believing Catholic, that's not how we see it. And so it's just a strange thing. It's a strange thing to see. I mean, this is the Pope, and we're doing the screenshots of the old tweets, because many people are treating this election of a pope as if he'd just been nominated to be a cabinet secretary or something. And it's as I said, sort of a strange thing to see. Now, as for his old tweets, and you've probably seen some of them, there are some red flags there. I mean, there's some cause for concern. He's taken moderate or left-leaning stances on things like immigration, things like climate change. He was critical of J.D. Vance, which is very unfortunate. He's been critical of Trump's immigration policies, along with amplifying other people who've criticized him, retweeting. So people are going through and finding the Pope's retweets. So that's all. Those are red flags. There's no way around it. I mean, that's cause for concern. Now, on the other hand, he's a registered Republican. He was an active Republican primary voter, which is also a weird thing to say about a pope. It's strange to say that the pope is a Republican voter is strange. Better than the alternative, of course. Much rather that than he was a Democrat voter, but that's on the positive end of things. He's on the record taking very conservative traditional stances on marriage, on the family, on abortion, and that's all good. The name he took, Leo the 14th, is a good sign. Leo the 13th was a great pope. Some people have pointed out that this pope wore the traditional papal vestments when he first came out to address the crowd, which Francis did not. So that's a signal, that's a nod towards tradition, which is also good. And that's, again, a lot of what you're seeing in the Pope analysis is, that's why a lot of it is like cross purposes, because, again, if you're not, I'm not saying that if you're not Catholic, you shouldn't talk about it, or, of course, it's a major world event. And also as a Catholic, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that I'm part of the Catholic Church, and when we get a new leader, it's a fact that matters to everybody. I think that's great. So I have no objection to people outside the church offering their analysis, but you're just looking at it from a very different lens, and so we end up talking sometimes at cross purposes. And so if you're not a Catholic, and somebody were to say that, hey, yeah, here are some red flags, but here's a good sign. He wore the vestments. If you're not a Catholic, that might seem totally silly to you. Like, really? What does that have to do with anything? He just wore, so it's like the red. He wore some red on his robe instead of the all white robe. Why does that matter? But from a Catholic perspective, as a believing Catholic, you see this as respect for church tradition, which is very important in and of itself, and also it's important because of what it potentially signals and symbolizes. and especially coming from the previous pope, who notoriously, infamously, did not have the same level of respect for church tradition. And that's probably putting it mildly. So I see kind of a mixed bag, although this pope in that mixed bag appears to be conservative in the most important areas for a pope to be conservative. And this is another thing that I think some people don't quite understand. You know, there are a lot of things that the Twitter commentariat doesn't quite understand about the Pope, and this is one of them. Immigration is an extremely important issue. Of course, I talk about it all the time. But for a Pope, it's more important that he gets the issues of life, marriage, and sexual morality right. Because those issues are more fundamental, first of all. They are more morally fundamental. And also, as a pope, he's leading the universal church. He's not leading just the American church, he's leading the universal church. And so American sovereignty is incredibly, deeply important, but it's not a universal issue in the same sense that the institution of the family is universal. The institution of the family is universal in the sense that it's important across the entire globe and for all time. The institution of the family existed, since the beginning of since the beginning of humanity, before the United States of America existed, and it will outlast this country because all countries, in the end, are temporal. So, so that's it's more important to get that right as a pope. So for me, when I'm looking at a new pope, the first thing I'm checking is where is he on those issues. That's the most important thing. And then these other things can be important, but they're secondary. Now, look, I think it'd be great if the Pope was a right-wing nationalist like me, but I never had any expectation that that would be the case. I'm not surprised that it isn't. And it would be different if he was the president. You know, if he was elected president of the United States, then his stance on American sovereignty would be of much greater importance, which isn't to say that it's of no importance for the Pope, but we have to see these things in a certain perspective. Now, that said, the Pope supporting or calling for mass migration, the invasion of the third world into the first world, the third world invasion in first world countries, if the Pope calls for that or supports it, that's a huge problem. That's deeply damaging. And if this Pope does that, if he does it as Pope, then I will oppose it. I will come out against it, just like I did with Francis. And that's my whole point here. If this Pope does things as Pope that I personally think are objectionable or harmful or wrong, I'll say so. My track record on that is very clear. But I also want to give him a chance, and I think that's reasonable. So, if 8 months from now, Pope Leo XIV comes out and condemns American immigration policy and declares that we have a moral duty to accept an unchecked flood of third world immigrants, and if that were to happen, you don't have to come back to me and say, see, Matt, I told you so. You were wrong. I'm not saying that won't happen. I'm saying I want to see what happens. I'm saying I hope it doesn't happen. And I'm saying I don't want to condemn the Pope's, the papacy ahead of time. I don't want to condemn his tenure as Pope ahead of time. So you can call that cope or whatever. I don't care. I think it's just obviously the most reasonable stance to take. And it's a more charitable stance. And yeah, as a Catholic, I want to take a charitable stance towards the Pope. You got me. Guilty as charged. And I'm also not suggesting that this Pope will miraculously become based on, issues like immigration and climate change. That could happen. I don't think it will. I think the more likely positive outcome is that what I'm hoping for, what I think is plausible, though I don't know how likely, is that for this Pope, issues like immigration and climate change are just not a major focus of his papacy. They were a major focus for Francis. My hope is that they're just not a focus. He doesn't spend a lot of time on them. And instead he focuses on moral and spiritual matters, on the fundamental moral and spiritual matters. That's what I'm hoping for. Am I predicting that? No, I'm not. I'm hoping for it. I'm praying for it. One other point, as others have pointed out, and I think it is important to keep this in mind, is that, and I know that Knowles has hammered this point, that the modern American political paradigm cannot be so easily or cleanly grafted onto the papacy. It cannot be so neatly applied to a 2,000-year-old institution. So when someone says that the Pope is woke or liberal, that label only goes so far. I mean, even for Francis, who I criticized a fair amount, but even then, it only went so far. So for instance, this Pope, just like Francis, appears to be stringently opposed to abortion, has spoken out against transgenderism, and spoken out against gay marriage. And it's pretty incoherent, right, by our political standards, to call somebody woke when they have those positions. I mean, those are the high sacraments of wokeism, and he's against them. So, I mean, how could you possibly? No one who we call woke would accept you into their club if those are your positions, right? And it's especially incoherent coming from some conservative influencers. There are some conservative influencers who I've seen sort of condemning this Pope as woke, or maybe condemning might be too strong a phrase for some of them, but warning of this Pope's wokeness. There are some who have done that, who I know support gay marriage and also support abortion, at least up to a certain point in pregnancy. Those are the two wokest positions you can have. And so you're really not in a spot to call anyone else woke when you are okay with the definitional destruction of the marital institution and the desecration of the sanctity of human life. I mean, if you're on board with that or okay with it, then you are woke on the two most important things: yourself. And the problem is that in American politics, this dynamic doesn't really exist. You're not going to find an American politician who is, quote unquote, far right on homosexuality, transgenderism, and abortion, and yet left-leaning on immigration. That doesn't exist in American politics. I can't think of an example. Can you? Can you think of an example of an American politician who would have what we would call right-wing positions, even far-right positions on homosexuality, transgenderism, and abortion, and yet have what we would consider left-leaning positions on immigration? I can't think of a single example of that. It basically doesn't exist. It does, however, exist for popes. And now I'd prefer for them to be on the right on everything, like I am. But again, it just shows that American political categories don't fully apply here. Which is why if you're trying to apply those categories, you end up either claiming that a guy who marched in the March for Life and came out against homosexual lifestyles is woke, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Or you end up claiming that a guy who talks about climate change and criticizes Trump's immigration policies is conservative, which in our political landscape also is confusing. So that's just something to keep in mind. And that brings me back to, I'd like to see what happens. I want to give this Pope a chance. One thing I will predict is that whether this ends up being a good Pope or a bad Pope, or something in between. I mean, there have been bad popes, and there have been great ones. But whatever ends up being the case, the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. And I'll pray for this Pope and the church. And that's where I'm at right now. To be continued, I guess, is what I'll say. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.